to join us to come in. So we'll wait. I have 7:03 now. We'll just wait till another minute or so. I'll just say it would be great if people would turn on your videos so we could see you. Have a sense that we're all in this together tonight.
Just briefly, do you have a picture for me?
Cole, can you mute that one?
Who's speaking? Brent, are you speaking, Brenda? No.
Oh, no.
No.
Okay, well, I think we should begin. On behalf of the Middle East Working Group of Massachusetts Peace Action, I want to welcome everyone to this special webinar that we have this evening, covering some subjects we have not covered before. My name is Paul Shannon, and Cole Harrison, the Executive Director of Mass Peace Action, is running the technology for us tonight. So I'm ready to really jump into this. All I'll say is the Middle East Committee at Mass Peace Action is open to new members. We need people that are interested in working, whether it's on Syria, whether it's on Yemen, whether it's on Iraq or Iran, the Iran nuclear deal, with focused especially on trying to get rid of sanctions that have been imposed by the US and the West on a number of countries. So please keep that in mind after tonight's program. If you're interested, I'll put a link in the chat to bring you to our webpage. But for now, let me introduce our two speakers. Ramy Shaath is a prominent Palestinian-Egyptian political activist. He's the son of the former minister of the Palestine Authority, and he's fought for decades in the Egyptian and Palestinian political scenes on human rights causes, of which, of course, there are so many, and so many tragic ones. Céline Lebrun-Shaath, his wife, is a community organizer and political activist. She is also a head teaching fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. Now, after their success in organizing a boycott, divestment, and sanctions, as we call BDS, a chapter of that BDS in Cairo, Céline and Ramy were targeted by Egypt's government. Céline was deported in the middle of the night, and Ramy was kidnapped, disappeared, and spent over 2.5 years in prison without charge. From Paris, Céline organized a worldwide campaign, helped out by the Freedom Initiative in Washington, D.C., a worldwide campaign for Ramy's freedom. The campaign reached even the President Macron of France, was supported by hundreds of lawmakers from around the world, and featured dozens of celebrities and public figures, ultimately culminating in Ramy's release and deportation to France. So we're talking about a story tonight where something came out of all the efforts of a lot of people, and it's only because of that that we have both Céline and Ramy with us this evening. Ramy and Céline tonight will discuss the situation for human rights and political activism in Egypt. particularly the shared struggles of the Palestinian and Egyptian people in demanding justice for human rights violations supported by the United States, supported by regimes supported by the United States. So welcome, Céline and Ramy. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to hearing your insights and having the chance to ask you our questions.
Thank you, Paul, for having us, and I'm honored to be with you. And I'm very interested in your forum and the work that you do. I am an Egyptian-Palestinian, born to a Palestinian father and an Egyptian mom, born in Lebanon in the early 70s. So I lived through a lot of the civil war and the Israeli bombardment of Lebanon. And the family left Lebanon late 70s before the actual invasion in 82. We went to Cairo. I think this period that I have seen in it a lot of violence, a lot of blood, but also seen a lot of heroism and resistance. And I think that shaped me personally for a very long time. I remember going back to Cairo. Maybe one of my first experiences was in school, making at 11 years old, doing my school political talk once a week, that was usually about Palestine or about the war in Lebanon or about sometimes local Egyptian things. And one day I've been summoned by head teacher who introduced me to a colonel in state security, who told me that I was not allowed anymore to do my weekly talk. That was my first encounter with Egyptian security. I think at that point, I did not know what state security means, and I wasn't sure why I was banned, but I understood that my ability to express pain or experience, especially when it is regarding Palestine, is prohibited, and that should not be allowed. Again, I've been arrested a couple of times after that during the Iraqi war in 1990, in demonstrations, but all were short times. 2011 probably have changed the situation in Egypt a lot. I was part of the group that organized and managed the square in Tahrir in the 25th of January 2011 revolution. And since the coup in June 2013, things have become very bloody in Egypt. The regime probably who have heard people chanting for freedom, justice, and social justice have understood it in a different way, have understood that this revolution was done by activists, so he should completely put them in jail. That was done by the Islamic movement. He should destroy it and kill everybody. It was done through intellectuals talking and mingling in downtown bookshops and coffee shops, so he shut them down. That was organized through Facebook, so Facebook became monitored. I actually, eventually, when I went to jail, I found hundreds of Egyptians that were arrested basically because an officer stopped them, confiscate their phone, and check their Facebook account. And if he found a joke or a post, or even sometimes a liking to a joke or a post, was enough for them to be arrested and thrown in jail as terrorists. Things starting from 2013 started getting bloodier. And definitely the issue of Palestine as well became more and more sensitive. He knew that his positioning regionally with Israel, that is the way to get the world acceptance of his coup and acceptance of the military regime. That has to be done through Israel. And even at the early points when the Obama administration stopped military aid to Egypt, actually it was Ehud Barak and a group from the Israeli Knesset that went to the US to pressure the return of the military aid to Egypt. He knew that positioning will allow him to go by suppressing Egyptians in every way. But two, also Palestine for him was a problem because the 2011 revolution had a lot of Palestinian flags, had a lot of Palestinian songs, had a lot of Palestinian poems. Part of it because Palestine in Egyptian imagination is the call for freedom, and it's the meaning of freedom, and the struggle for Palestine represent this idea of fighting injustice. And he definitely wanted to suppress those feelings from being imported back to Egypt and building up a new revolution against his corruption and his suppression. By 2014, the Egyptian revolution has been hampered to a very strong extent. And the war in Gaza was raging again with another Israeli massacre in Gaza. That pushed us to reform BDS in Egypt. Egypt had, of course, a long history of boycott programs against Israel, but has never been effective and has always been a rhetoric rather than a planned, organized action. BDS, when it started in Egypt 2014, it started with 10 Egyptian political parties, many NGOs and many syndicates, labor and medical and engineering syndicates. It formed a threat to the regime, not only because it's exposing its regional alliances, but also because in actually most of the cases when we looked into Israeli-Egyptian relations and economic relations and deals, whether in gas and oil or in other economic sectors, it was all run by members of the military regime or members of his security apparatus. So it was the same perpetrators of corruption and oppression in Egypt were the same culprits and partners of the Israelis in different way. And by exposing those relations, it was not only boycotting Israel in that sense, but also exposing corruption in Egypt in many different senses. The BDS grew in Egypt to the point where we were having hundreds of volunteers every month, including many people who were not politicized, but were interested in the Palestinian cause. And at the time, the civic space in Egypt was closing, and political parties were not allowed to function. NGOs were closing down, and people were sent to jails. BDS also played a place of where political parties can meet, where can they discuss, where they can unify, at least on the call for Palestine, but also to discuss other matters of the country. By the late 2018, there was the Donald Trump-Kushner deal of the century. And it was very difficult not to engage against that steal of the century. We started organizing around it and being very vocal against it. And on the 25th of June, 2019, there was the Manama Conference, which was the economic aspect of the deal of the century. We had a counter conference in Lebanon with many of different Arab opposition groups, the Emirati opposition, the Bahraini opposition, and the Moroccan opposition, with the Egyptian opposition and other kind of oppositions in the Arab world. Sure enough, a few days later, I came to Cairo and I was arrested. They attacked my home by midnight with tens of armed men. Of course, not identifying themselves and not showing any warrant. They stole basically everything from around the house that was not registered and was not illegal in the legal framework. They told me from the first minute that the guy who arrested me was a general in state security. And he told me, well, I have no idea. This is way bigger than me. And in Egyptian terms, that refers to the presidency office. They took Céline, deported her immediately, unjustly and without any basis of the law. And they took me, blindfolded me, handcuffed me, and threw me in forced disappearance. And in forced disappearance, i.e. a place that is illegal, that is not known, that my family, my lawyers would not know where I am. And I was attached, handcuffed to a wall and left there for a few days. I was not even asked a question, and I was wondering, why are they here? I knew to extent that I'm always been an activist and an opposition, but why now and why this? Anyway, a few days later, they took me to a prosecutor's office, a security prosecutor's office, which is basically a security officer in a suit of a prosecutor's office, where he interrogated me. And actually, that is the only interrogation I had through the 2.5 years of my imprisonment. That was supposedly, I was imprisonments under detention for interrogation. I was interrogated once. And that interrogation, he asked me about my opinion in the revolution and BDS and who did I vote for presidency. And I asked, so how is that to do with any case or any charges against me? He said, okay, we're charging you of being part of a terrorist organization. I said, okay, what is the terrorist organization? He said, we cannot tell you. So I laughed. I mean, how can you tell me the organization that I'm part of? And then he said, and we're charging you of spreading lies and rumors against the state using social media networks. And I laughed again, and I said, I'm a very well-known activist, and actually people make fun of me because I don't use social media. I don't even have a Facebook account. He said, oh, where do you talk politics? How do people listen to you? I said, I get interviewed a lot on TV. He said, okay, so we'll change it. We'll make it TV. I said, okay. And that was it. And from that, they renewed my detention 45 days after the other for 2.5 years. The second day after that interrogation, they took me back to forced disappearance. In that forced disappearance, the guy coming in, again, I was blindfolded and handcuffed, and asked me, what was your number? I said, I don't know. Nobody gave me a number. He said, but you were here in the last few days. You should know your number. I said, nobody gave me a number. So he went and asked and came back and said, okay, you are the non-numbered guy. Of course, when I actually went to prison and met hundreds of other political prisoners and detainees, I discovered that, yes, through forced disappearances that nearly everybody go through, people get blindfolded, handcuffed, and attached to a wall and are given numbers, and they stay like that for days, weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. I've known of people who've been there for years. Some of them, of course, get killed and buried without anybody announcing it. And this is the places where people have systematic torture every night from 9 p.m. till 5 a.m. There is a torture party in every state security office in Egypt where there's people who are forcefully disappeared, where people usually ask two things. One, give us names if you were arrested in a demonstration, so give us names of other people to arrest. Or if you're arrested through a Facebook group, give us names of people in that group. And to my surprise, a lot of the people were asked, just tell us something wrong you did. They don't actually have anything on them on the file, and they don't have any clear accusation. So tell us something wrong that you did. Eventually, they took me to a prison. That prison was Torah prison, which is a complex of 9 prisons. Each prison of those have 4 annexes. So in my annex was like 420 people. In estimates, there's 60,000 Egyptian political prisoners in Egypt, a number that have never been seen. And of course, a number that is very difficult to verify because those 60,000 basically are the ones who are in official jails, not including the one who are disappeared. That jail was basically cells of 23 square meters that we were 18 to 32 people in a place of around 240 square foot, like a small living room. At points, we had this space each to sleep in because to fit on that amount of people. In my case, and many times I couldn't sleep. I had to wait till the morning when people wake up to take my turn. Of course, we were sleeping on the floor in a small mattress with the place run down and packed with insects, with a bathroom 1 meter by 75 square centimeter, a hole and a cold shower on top of it. And that's where we lived for 2.5 years. I could go on with the unhuman treatments and the amount of aggressiveness and brutality I've seen around me, and I've seen the torture on people's bodies as well as on their souls. With absolutely no medical care, we had a usual people dying because of medical negligence or because of bad treatment. I can tell you a lot about the families who the humiliation that they pass through waiting for hours to see their loved ones. It is a systematic torture place. It's a systematic detention camp for political prisoners. That is also not only run by oppression, but also run by corruption. It's a full corruption scheme that starts from entering your home and stealing your belongings, going through the money they take from you and from the family for visiting you or for delivering food to you in one way or another, till the money they make through courts, till officially freezing your assets or confiscating them even without a court order. It's a major corruption scam. I can go on about solitary confinements where people used to spend days in a 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter room with no windows, no doors, and no lights, and a bottle of water and a bucket for a bathroom, and they should stay there for 2 weeks for the lamest reasons. I have seen a friend of mine dying in one of those because he couldn't take the darkness and the solitary for more than 3 days. It was a very difficult experience. By the end of the 2.5 years, of course, meanwhile, Céline, my wife, was campaigning outside for my release. Definitely, her campaigning was getting me a little bit of security inside, i.e. because my name was known. I was less tortured and less abused in compared to other people, but eventually led to my freedom. By the end of it, again, I was kidnapped from prison by this time the Egyptian General Intelligence Service, who took me to one of their dungeons underground and blindfolded me, handcuffed me, and threw me there for a few days before taking me to an aeroplane in my jail clothes after stripping me from my nationality, my Egyptian nationality. And that what eventually led me to France. Of course, all through that period, I was not asked a question. I was not interrogated, even in my forced disappearances. But in the first month, when people and a lot of dignitaries asked about my arrest and tried to pressure my release, they were told his arrest is an Egyptian-Israeli Emirati decision with a green light from the Trump administration. I.e., forget it, he's not going out. We have the regional backing and the international cover to keep him indefinitely. Well, thousands, many other Egyptians are there for much lamer reasons, but at least in my case, I knew the perpetrators. Yes, I understand. I'm, being an activist, and especially for Palestine, people cease to understand the complexity of the whole region. This region has been managed for the last 70 years, at least, with this duality of occupation and dictatorship. They feed each other, they support each other, they coordinate with each other, and they realize that this is the way to pass by with the American support and with the European support and complicity, is by having relation with occupation. And the Sisi regime have realized that very early on and has positioned himself as a strong ally to Israel, and that saved him a lot of the problems he should have faced for his major human rights abuses. Well, I just wanted to make short that last experience, and then we can start talking about the more intricate issues of the Middle East. I'll pass to Céline, maybe her other perspective as my campaigner and support from the outside.
Hello, everyone. I want to make sure so we get time for Q&As. So I'm also more than happy to if we want to get some questions and then to answer. But very briefly, first, I'm very happy that Ramy is with me on this call right now, and to have been able to accompany him every time he shares his story. And that's something he's been adamant to do for the past 9 months since it's been out, because we have still so many of our friends in prison. And I think it's an important message also for people to hear. My journey, my journey started through Palestine and led me to Egypt, and I got to see how both are the path of both countries are very interconnected. I first got to learn about Palestine during the 2008 Israeli attack on Gaza, the very first bombings. And I was at university at that time. And 6 months later, I was traveling to Palestine to see on the ground what was happening there. And that led me to, that changed my life, that led me to become an activist and an organizer within the BDS movement. And I remember in December 2009, so actually 1 year after the gas-led operation, there was this international, I think it was called the Gaza Freedom March, that was a delegation of 1,500 activists from all around the world. And there was actually a big delegation from the US. I don't know, maybe some of you here were there. And we wanted to go to Gaza 1 year after the attack to commemorate the attack and spend the new year with the Gaza people. And so I remember we landed in Cairo, and in Cairo we discovered that the Egyptian authorities would not let us go to Gaza. And for me, it was such a surprise and a shock. How come? And for 2 weeks we tried, and I remember the French delegation ended up sleeping on the sidewalk in front of the French embassy to try to pressure the French embassy, to pressure the Egyptian authorities to let us go to Gaza. And except giving me a very bad image of Egypt at the time, that hopefully was corrected years later with the Egyptian revolution. I mean, it became very clear for me, this complicity between the Israeli occupation on one hand and authoritarian regime on the other hand. And we can see another manifestation of this through the blocus that's on Gaza since 2006.
Yep.
And it's only 3 years later that I was able to go for the first time to Gaza through Egypt. And it was only because in those 3 years, something had happened. The Egyptian revolution, and as imperfect as it was, it had led to a democratically elected government for the first time with Mohamed Morsi, even though obviously we might disagree with the political tendency, but we were allowed then during the attack of 2012 on Gaza to go. And again, 2 years later, during the 2014 Israeli attack on Gaza, a similar convoy was banned. And because between then, there had been a coup that led to General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi being elected or being in control, being ruling Egypt. And so that shows how really the solidarity with Palestine and like the freedom for Palestine and the freedom of the Egyptian people and human rights in the region are interconnected. And I met in this convoy Ramy, so that was the only good thing of this convoy. I knew that most probably we wouldn't be allowed in Gaza. So I thought, okay, there is going to be 500 activists stuck for hours in buses with no other thing to do than to listen to what we might have to say. So let's tell them about BDS. And so printed some flyers and went into those buses and spoke with the people about BDS, met Ramy, and that's how it started. And today a lot of the political prisoners who have been detained are like at the forefront of solidarity with Palestine, with many, many causes around the world. And so it's very important that we show solidarity with them in this moment. And especially we're at a time where Egypt is being given opportunity to greenwash its crime. In less than 2 months, there is going to be the COP27 that will be hosted in Egypt. Actually, next year it's going to be the UAE. So we're seeing regimes with very, very bad records on human rights being granted the hosting of such an event. And I mean, we need to ask, like, how can there be any climate justice in a country where there is no justice at all? So anyway, I'm more than happy to engage and to share more about the campaign for the release of Ramy, and to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much, Céline. Thank you, Ramy. It's quite an ordeal. And to think that so many thousands and thousands of others are going through it right at this minute is.
And you know, definitely, when I came to prison, there was probably 4 annexes. 2 of them were the Islamic movement, and 1 was the civil movement, and 1 was a mixed annex. But in time, things have changed, and more arbitrary people are the ones thrown in jail. And I could not begin tell you the kind of stories I found there. I had with me a doctor, a surgeon, who was prisoned because his 9-year-old boy in 3rd grade was in his lunch break in school singing a song called Ya Hilwa Ya Balaha Ya M'amma'a. And that's a very old Egyptian song. And Balaha is a date. And Egyptian opposition makes fun of General Sisi, calling him a date, that he looks like a date. So the school teacher called state security, and they came and found the kid, 9-year-old boy. So they arrested his father. And his father was stayed in prison for 2 years going each time to a court in the name of his 9-year-old boy to answer for the song the boy was singing in class. I can go on for hours telling you about this kind of crazy stories of people in detention.
And the only countries that receive more military aid from the United States than Egypt are Ukraine and Israel.
That's true. You can track the record.
It's amazing.
It's
Well,
I want to tell you on the military issue. One day when Céline was campaigning and and Macron said my name in a conference with Sisi that I should be released. Second day they came and attacked my room and destroyed everything in it as a punishment for me for having an international support. But 2 weeks later, the officers called me in and said, Ramy, do you really believe that the West cares about human rights? This is all bull. And I said, well, if you telling me that governments care about their interest, economic and strategic, more than human rights, you're probably right. But lots of sectors of the Western community do believe in human rights, and we have shared values with them. And in a democracy, those can pressure their governments to change attitude. So he looked at me and said, well, you might be right, but nothing our president cannot change with a good big arm deal. So even a small officer of security in a prison realizes that his president uses arm deals as a way to whitewash his crimes and to give him cover and immunity from the kind of crimes he's doing against his people.
Yeah. Well, I want to open it up to see if at this stage people have questions. If they do, you can go down to the reactions button and raise your hand there. And when we see the hands raised, we'll unmute you. As we're waiting for that to happen, I'm just wondering if we could get into your take right now, both of you, on the situation in Palestine and the situation in Egypt in terms of possibilities for change and possibilities for international solidarity, and basically to find out from you the things you think we should know about kind of the inside story of what's happening in Palestine now, and whether there's anything that that people in the United States can do on the Egypt situation.
Okay, Palestine, we are in a very bad internal situation with a very weak government that was basically came to power after the assassination of Yasser Arafat and his death, and an Israeli occupation of the West Bank that got this government into power. And unfortunately, this government has been showing complete helplessness, inability to engage, and a continued fraction within the Palestinian political society, not actually the society. The Palestinian society is not fractured, but its political segments are. And of course, in that context, that gives a lot of part of the world an easy whitewash that we don't care about what's happening in Palestine, and that they should shape up, not realizing that Israel is the main perpetrator of even that split in Palestine, and it's keeping it because of its own reasons. Of course, we all know the continuation of settlements, the enlargement of settlements, eating up the land, ending up the possibility of a two-state solution without really any possibility of a one-state apartheid system. We all know the Israeli continued control of water, airspace, and borders that's suffocating Palestinians' ability to grow. We all know the situation in Palestinian cities being sieged by the wall, destroying agriculture and destroying development in Palestine. So yes, the whole idea is to kill Palestinian ability to develop and to continue in the West Bank, while pressuring Gaza into submission. on the other hand. Unfortunately, this has been supported by Arab dictators around us. On the other, on one hand, in Gaza, it's an Egyptian-Israeli siege to Gaza, and on the other is a Jordanian silency and a Gulf whitewashing and Abraham Accords that is cementing this relation between dictatorship and occupation. And yes, we have a lot to do. It's actually the United States that is doing that. It is the United States support, funding, pressuring Arab countries into relation with Israel, pressuring the Sudanese and the Moroccans into Abraham Accords, and with absolutely disregard of the bigger and the longer picture. Since I came to the United States, I have been told many times, whispering in my ears, Ramy, you have to realize that the United States is going into the Cold War mood. And the whole Ukrainian situation is getting the United States into the very old territory. And I always replied, and who told you that the United States was successful in the old Cold War in the Middle East? The Middle East was a disaster. Half of it was pro-Soviet Union, and the rest was in shackles. And if you're going to repeat the same duality in trying to manage the Middle East, it's actually going to blow up in a much worse situation. And that will be the entry, actually, of the Chinese and the Russians. The kind of model that Sisi represent, and the kind of model that bin Salman represent, and the kind of model that bin Zayed represent, and the kind of model that the Israeli government represent is actually much closer to the model of the Chinese and the Russians, not the model of a democracy, if you're trying to say that this is a democratic value system versus other systems. In reality, it's complicity with occupation, complicity with dictatorship, and that's destroying our area.
So where do either of you see hope, either in Palestine, in Egypt, or in other areas of the Middle East to break open this structure?
I mean, I personally see hope everywhere. And I know it might be like hard sometimes, but like even like in the campaign for Ramy, when I had all the reason to be desperate, the solidarity and the support I found, and sometimes in places I was not expecting, honestly, was very hopeful. I mean, I went and knocked at the doors of many lawmakers, for example, in France, but even here in the US, I walked the corridors of the Senate and the Congress, and I received a warm welcome. And yes, BDS is not the best talking point. And so telling them to please act for the release of a BDS activist jailed in Egypt was challenging, but I found support. I found people who were willing to take on this fight. And I don't think that this would have been even possible maybe 1 or 2 decades ago. So the narrative is changing. We see more and more people speaking up on behalf of Palestine. And I think it came very, very obvious last summer around the events happening at Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan. And so it's a real source of hope. I mean, we met her last week, but like someone like Rashida Tlaib, Ilan Omar, and like women representatives with those positions in Congress shows that. And in France, I would say it's a bit similar, even though it's sometimes more gloomy, but we are winning. And I know there is a question in the chat about, for example, laws trying to repress and target BDS activists, like, and to criminalize BDS. But these attempts have been defeated. For example, I think it was a year ago, the European Court attacked or like criticized France and dismissed like France rulings that had been happening in France repressing BDS as being like a violation of human rights, of the right the freedom of speech. And so this was a big victory. And so, yes, there are attempts to censor us, to silence us, but we are winning. Ramy is an example of that, that when we come together, when we fight, we can win. So, yeah.
Let me add a little bit different angle.
Thank you.
I have, since I came out of prison, toured a lot in Europe and now in the United States, and I've seen most of the foreign ministries of Europe as well as the State Department in here. And I have been in that business for some 35 years. And I am astonished that nobody have a real clue of how to deal with the Middle East. There is no plan, there is no strategy, there is no vision, and everybody I met realizes that their policy towards the Middle East is a failing one, but don't know how to handle it. And I think that gives us a space for the first time to create a different narrative, to talk a different vision for the area. You know, mostly when you meet politicians in the West, they have a clear idea, and your ability diplomatically or through activism to change things are very minor and on the surface of the things. But today people are listening, and listening because they don't have a vision. I think in the last 20 years or the last 15 years, all American policymakers have made a clear decision to withdraw from the Middle East. That the Middle East became too expensive, too inappropriate, and is even less strategically important with American independency and having enough oil and gas and actually exporting them. So it became much less important strategically to the United States. Obama have tried handing over the area to the Turks under the Islamic movement in the Arab world, hoping that the Turks will manage the area during American fight with the Russians and the Chinese and the whole superpower quarrels. That failed. And came Trump with the deal of the century, thinking he can hand over the area to the Israelis, and they will manage the area till the Americans end their quarrels strategically with the Russians and the Chinese. And I think that failed. And I think nobody today have a vision of how to deal with the Middle East, and that allows us a new space to create a new narrative.
Thank you. That's interesting. We can follow up on that, but let's take a couple of questions. We have Michael Hoey first, and then we have Caroline Scar next. Michael?
Yeah. So the concern I have, or the question, has to do with, it seems like there's a couple different blocks now. There's one that's somewhat aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood with Qatar and Turkey and maybe Libya. And then there's the royalists, who would be Morocco and Saudi Arabia and different Abrahamic Accords, who I guess are trying to line up in some ways with Israel. So I'm not sure if this is recent or if it's been going on longer than I've been paying attention to it, but it seems like there's always a conflict between different, I'm not sure if it's ideologies or just outlooks on life, between what are referred to as the Islamist or the Muslim Brotherhood and the royalist. And then, like you mentioned before, at one time they were Soviet allies like Iraq and at one time Egypt under Nasser, which also I think caused the civil war with Saudi Arabia in the 60s. So my curiosity is, how does this larger picture of inter-Arab rivalry play into the issues that you're dealing with?
I mean, I have to tell you that I mean, of course, there's gonna always be quote unquote inter-Arab rivalries because we're talking about monarchs and dictators. So it's a very personalized issue. It's not really based on ideology or strategic imposition. And even the Qatari Turkish Muslim Brother alliance is over. the Turks and the Qataris has made their peace with the Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the dictator of Egypt, or with the Saudis and Emiratis. So even this axis in the region are over, and those in reality, whether it was the Qatari Turkish Muslim Brotherhood acts versus the Saudi, Emirati, Israeli, Egyptian acts, both of them were reporting to Washington. So both of them had a role within the area under a bigger strategy within the area. And when that role is over, the discrepancies has ended. We've seen the Egyptian president in Qatar, and we've seen the Erdogan in Saudi Arabia. So this whole axis game is over in the Arab world, and that's part, I think, is part of the debacle and lack of vision and strategy in the Middle East. Nobody really realizes how the area is boiling up. The Americans are too busy with targeting China and containing Russia in a war in Ukraine, and maybe the Middle East only is looked at from an Israeli perspective or from the Iranian nuclear deal perspective. Just like Paul told me very early on that these are the kind of issues we talk about here, but we rarely talk about Egypt. Yes, because the strategic importance of that area is over. And it is left to its debacle, but actually that might come much worse to Europe and to the Western alliance.
Thank you. Carolyn, I can't find you anymore, so let's move on to Nancy Wallace Nelson. Next question.
There, I unmuted. My question is, I was reacting when you said we don't have a policy. I remember for years I've read that we have very few people who really know Arabic. We had our arrogance that we didn't think that was important. And then, of course, I understand that under Trump, the State Department completely disintegrated because of how many people left. They couldn't bear to work with him. And I don't see that we've rebuilt that. But at a larger level, what I'm most concerned about is the US ongoing support of Israel and the merging, as I see it, of a Zionist position and this Christian white nationalist perspective that to me is very scary, that it's very racist, it's very militaristic. And I don't know if you have a comment about that, but.
I think we lost her, but I think the message is there. And yes, she's back, but you have to open your.
No, I think she finished.
Okay, I agree with that, and definitely the superpower quarrels, the end of the Second World War parameters and security arrangements, and the economic situation we're facing definitely is pushing the world into two extremes. We can see that very clearly, even in France. The end of the Socialist Party and the end of the de Gaullist Party, and people going more and more into the extreme right wing and the extreme left wing. Yes, there is major polarization going on the world. And yes, for me, that somehow reminds me with the 30s of this last century, and I'm very worried about where is that taking us. But yes, I agree with her. This recreating an identity based on biblical interpretations, and but basically this is political alliances. This is strategic alliances. I mean, we have been sold religion and we've been sold religious interpretations for crimes. For me, that has really nothing to do with religious interpretation, rather than it's political alliances, it's economic alliances. And yes, definitely, And I said that in Congress in the last week and in the State Department, by supporting people like Sisi, by supporting the Israeli occupation in Palestine, you're actually not only hurting American strategy, but you're hurting yourself as Democrats. You're ending your possibility for a future governance in the United States. You're supporting the Trump's vision and the kind of people that supports Trump, not only directly, but also indirectly. You're supporting this kind of vision of the world. Yes, for me, those fights are very interconnected. We can either change the discourse of these fights or we're going to lose it all.
Okay, Carol.
If I
Are you going to let me?
Okay, go ahead, Carolyn.
I would like to talk about Syria. Living on the West Coast as I do, I'm acquainted with Paul Larudi, who's the founder of the Syrian Solidarity Movement. And I know that an awful lot of lies are told about that government. The Syrian government has been broadly elected by its population, and also it uses its resources to serve the needs of the people insofar as they can get their hands on it. And of course, everybody knows the United States is actually supporting the Islamic State, so-called. And the fact that the IS has got control of a fair piece of Syria is a very unfortunate situation. But I'd like to hear about Syria and how we can be more supportive of their own self-determination and freedom.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Any thoughts on your take on Syria?
For me, Syria is very like all the Arab revolts. They were revolts for freedom and for justice, and they were turned into bloody massacres. The difference is very intricate, and the difference, by the way, is Israel again. If you look at the Arab revolts, you will find 6 countries that were part of the quote-unquote Arab Spring. I don't like the word Arab Spring. I think they were freedom revolutions. But if you looked at them one by one, it is Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, and Bahrain. And if you look at the terminology before 2010, you will find that 3 of those were considered allies of the United States, which is Tunisia, Egypt, and Bahrain. And 3 of them were considered axis of evil, supporters of terrorism, all the slogans used in the world, i.e. those people do not recognize Israel and do not recognize American interest and strategic interest in the area. And if you look how the 6 revolutions managed in the Arab world, you will find the 3 of them who quote unquote are allies of the United States were managed to get the same old regimes back in power in the same way with the least possible problems and with the least possible losses. And you'll find on the 3 other countries, i.e. Syria, Yemen, and Libya, a total destruction of a country in an attempt to recreate a new social group that is willing to accept Israeli hegemony and American strategic interest in the area. And actually, this is happening. Definitely, we have a criminal of Bashar al-Assad, who is a dictator and who have suppressed his people. And definitely, if there is an attempt to destabilize Syria, he would be the one responsible for that. When I went to the European Union and I made my testimony about Egypt, one parliamentarian came to me and said, but Ramy, we sympathize with you and we understand, but Egypt is not the only criminal in the world. The Russians do the same, the Chinese do the same, the Syrians do the same, the Iranis do the same, the North Koreans do the same. I said, yes, but all of those you're not funding, but Egypt you are. And none of those you're arming, but Egypt you are. And none of those you're giving red carpet and support, but in Egypt case you are. So you are responsible for what's happening in Egypt, and you are responsible for what's happening in Palestine. And definitely the Syrian situation for me is a very disheartening issue. And I'm seeing it now is only part of a bigger quarrel of superpowers and bigger quarrel for oil and gas in the area.
Okay, thank you, Ramy. Céline, had you wanted to add anything? Because we have another question from Richard. Should we just take that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Richard, go ahead. Oops, you're still muted, Richard. Richard, you have to unmute yourself.
I think I had to do it.
Got it.
Got it, sorry.
Yeah, Ramy and Céline, you must know the power that the Israeli lobby has, AIPAC, over the Congress. Nobody speaks out with the fear of AIPAC coming after them. Right now, they're supporting candidates in primaries that show any inclination of any support for the Palestinian people at all. And in our mainstream meeting, well, like yesterday, what happened, 4 people, I was watching Democracy Now! And 4 Palestinians were killed. And you won't see that on the mainstream media at all. This goes on constantly. It's not just, but you don't hear these reports at all. So that's the power that the AIPAC lobby has. And it's just, you know, that all these progressives, so-called progressives, that for justice and civil rights in this country, they draw a line when it comes to they draw a line when it comes to Palestine.
But believe me, this is changing. I am seeing major change in this country. I'm seeing major change with the Jewish constituency. I'm seeing more and more Jews in the US supporting Palestinian rights for determination, realizing that Israel is an apartheid system. I just been with Peter Bainyard, who had passed through major transformation. And I don't think that was possible before. Today I was lecturing today and yesterday in Harvard, in Kennedy School, where you would know all the history and all the AIPAC power in there. But me, a revolutionary and a BDS representative, were lecturing in Harvard about BDS and about my experience and about complicity with Israel. So yes, to be honest, there is a grassroots movement growing in this country as well as in Europe that is seeing the reality in Palestine, that stopped seeing mainstream media and looking at alternative media, that is being connecting all the fights together, connecting the fight in Palestine with freedom in Egypt, to women's rights, to LGBT rights, to Black Lives Matters, to economic and social requirements. Yes, there is a growing tempo in the West, and I think we should support that. And this is what's going to change the narrative.
And I think also, I mean, I've heard about like the influence that AIPAC has, but like this influence comes out of fear, and I think we have something way much more powerful than fear. We inspire. We have a cause that's inspiring, and that's, I think, so much more powerful. And you see it, like I've heard, I mean, since we're here, we've been hearing and discussing that a lot, but apparently recently AIPAC tried to attack a representative. I forgot his name, someone who was quite outspoken on Palestine, and actually they were attacking him, but on something very different that had nothing to do with Palestine, because they knew that actually running ads on this representative's position on Palestine would not harm him. So they went for other arguments. And so I think it shows how they are aware that they are losing the narrative fight. And I think one thing that's been very helpful, I hear like that maybe mainstream media were still not there, but we have something again that's today is so much more powerful, and this is social media. I mean, again, the power of what happened last summer around Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, because the world was seeing, okay, maybe not in mainstream media, but the world was seeing on social media live, they could follow what was happening. And so I think, again, it's a source of hope that we can do so much if we that we can do so much when we come together, when we share what's happening. And I would not give up on your representatives. Like the power that we have if we organize, and I mean, okay, the power of AIPAC comes from they're organizing themselves. And so how can we do the same? And like, okay, if the representatives are worried and or of the impact AIPAC could have, what counter impact can we offer?
Okay, thank you, Céline. Let's take one last question from Prasannan.
Thank you, Paul. I'm sorry I joined late, so I apologize if this was all, my question was already covered in your remarks. But first, let me make a point about AIPAC. And what AIPAC is doing is it's not only taking up foreign policy issues, it's aligning itself with elements of the right wing. And these right wing billionaires are bankrolling a lot of its support for its politics right now. So it's very much a domestic political force with a foreign policy agenda behind it. So it's a really pernicious influence on U.S. politics right now. But my question really has to do with climate change and some of the forces that are really going to make this region less important. If serious action is taken on climate change, then Middle East oil is going to become much less essential. So what do you see happening if this actually unfolds? If hopefully this will unfold, that we will get off fossil fuels or minimize the use of fossil fuels. What do you see as the future of this region?
Well, you know, okay, I'll go strategic here. I tell people in Palestine and in Egypt, we are in a very tough time. The world is changing. Strategic balance is changing. Economy is changing. The environment is changing. Agriculture and by default changing industry. We're looking at major changes in technology in the coming 10 years. And those are the strategic windows that are opened to countries like the countries in the Middle East. They constitute a major danger because that can lead to our crumbling and our internal fights. And again, our area being used for superpower backdoor fighting. But again, it gives us an opportunity. This is the opportunities for countries to come out of that hegemony. The world is not concentrating on us. We are less important, and so there is less interference in our internal affairs. This is the time to shape up. But we need to do that in support with people like us all over the world. We need to do that in support with free people that believes in same shared values to change that equation and not to fall in the same trap that we fell again and again and again and again for the last 100 years.
Okay.
And you know, in the Arab world, unfortunately, there's always this vision that the oil was given to countries with much less culture, and that took from the cultural Egypt and cultural Syria and cultural Iraq and cultural Levant. Maybe the end of the use of oil will rechange that back in. So we might have a much more cultural Arab world.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to say, like, still, I'm very hopeful. So I really want hope to come across tonight, but like, because this has been said earlier, and that's what I wanted to react to on this. the coalition formed by Trump supporters and like very right-wing groups and pro-Israeli lobbies, and I think that's actually, I mean, I don't know that there is someone that might have helped more the Palestinian, like the cause for Palestinians, for solidarity with Palestine than Trump in making it like that clear. And I think like before that, the support to Israel had kind of been partisan, but like it created a rift, I think. And now the question is like, and it has also brought on the other side a movement like Black Lives Matter and pro-Palestinian groups very close by showing like what are the values that we stand for and who are actually our allies and who is actually progressive. I think that like many decades ago, Israel was considered as a progressive place, and I think this is changing, and that's very good. That's very good. The narrative around apartheid, the fact that apartheid is becoming the narrative is amazing. I mean, 10 years ago, more than 10 years, 10 years ago, I was directing a book called Israel and Apartheid State, ? And I mean, now, 10 years later, we're seeing Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, a lot of NGOs aligning that there is no more ? And so it should be a source of hope. And so let's ally with the same way that they are allying together. Let's ally with the people who share our values.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you both so much. I'm going to keep the last question to myself though, because we are running late. What model do you see as a way out for the Palestinians? In other words, is the two-state solution dead? What is your perspective on this? A one state is a different situation. Where is this going that could go in a positive direction for Palestinian self-determination?
You know, I am asked this a lot in the United States, and I'll tell you what I tell people. It is not my job to find a solution for occupation. The Palestinians have talked in 1972 about the democratic unified state, and the Israelis refused. And then the Palestinians went into long due process after process of negotiations for a two-state solution, and the Israelis have refused. For me, the time is to organize, is to BDS, is to pressure Israel in adhering to the law, is pressuring Israel to adhering to Palestinian rights for self-determination and for dignity. And from there, the Palestinians will have the right to choose the right model. Definitely, the Israelis are killing the two-state solution, but they're also giving us the other alternatives as an apartheid state. So they're giving us a choice between colonialism and apartheid, and I refuse both. So I mean, on what basis? I believe more in a right-based approach. I want the rights of Palestinians to be living in freedom and in dignity, and they will have eventually the right to choose the model, not me.
Okay. Well, thank you both very, very much. And thanks to our audience tonight for joining us, for participating. It sounds like the two of you have had a very successful trip here to the Boston area with a number of presentations, and we hope that you'll be coming through our area again sometime.
Thank you very much.
We will, and we'll be posting pictures on social media. So if you want to follow us, you can follow the Free Ramy Shaath account. Okay. And yeah.
In addition, we will be sending out an email, probably not tomorrow, but maybe beginning of the week, but soon, with a recording of tonight's program that you can use for other audiences, and that our audience tonight.
Thank you very much.
If you think you have friends that would like to have been here with us tonight, please share that recording with them. We'll send some other resources related to BDS and to the Middle East Working Group of Mass Peace Action. So if you're interested in working on these issues and digging in, please consider joining the Middle East Working Group of Mass Peace Action. And I put the link in the chat. So thanks to everyone. Ramy,
Thank you.
Céline.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.